So I'm going to guess we're the only church on the planet today that heard a little Janet Jackson. Now, this is really going to blow your mind. Britt, who just sang that song, was born the year that song came out. Oh. Well, so it's out there. My confession, I have control issues. And maybe you're like me, and to help you kind of maybe self-identify if this is you, I have a few thoughts that would resonate with you if you have control issues. Here's the first one. Maybe I wouldn't need to be such a control freak if you would just do as I say when I say it. Does that resonate? How about this one? I do things by myself because no one can meet my ridiculously high expectations. Or finally, fine, we'll compromise. I'll get my way, and you'll find a way to be okay with that. So let's be honest, just for a moment. How many would be honest and say, you know what, sometimes I do have control issues too, okay? Excellent. Your honesty is very much appreciated, but now we're going to switch to an intervention. Because some of you are sitting next to people who you're surprised did not raise their hands. How many of you are sitting next to someone that does have control issues, they just don't know it? All right? Any more? So control issues are at their root really an issue with trust. Now, I want to walk you through several different symptoms I've seen in my life, how I know this is a problem. You know you have control issues when you find yourself angry, anxious, or frustrated when what you want to happen doesn't happen. Or it does happen, just not the way you want. You know you have control issues when you tend to blame others when things don't go your way. Or when you find yourself judging other people. When you find yourself anxious and you don't even know why. When you get extremely frustrated with yourself when you mess up. You know you have control issues when you struggle to acknowledge that there are things that happen beyond your control. Or you have a short temper which is usually ignited when things don't go your way. And I struggle with control issues so much, I'm worried about how you're going to respond to me from this point forward. But I know I cannot control that. But it's really an important issue for me because at my worst moments, control issues can lead me to do things that I wouldn't want to do. At my worst moments, there are times when I can say what people want to hear instead of what is true. There are times when getting someone to do something I want them to do is more important than the person. There are times when my wife and children don't want to be around me. There's a very real danger because of these control issues that I could miss what God wants to do in my life because I refuse to trust Him since I want to be in control. There's a very real danger that I could so try to control the people that I love that the only way for them to avoid my controlling nature is to escape. There's a very real danger that I could misrepresent God to my children, and as a result, they could rebel against me by rebelling against Jesus, His church, and His ways. These thoughts terrify me. And when I'm scared, I revert back to trying to be more controlling. But it's not just my issue. All of us, if we follow after God and if we struggle with control issues, it's really important that we work through these because we represent God to those around us. Or maybe you're here and you're not yet following God. You're still sorting out whether or not you even believe in God. And control issues will still mess up your relationships. In fact, it may be those very control issues that have kept you from trusting God with your life. Ultimately, at its core, we have control issues when we struggle to trust others and when we struggle to trust God. So I have some good news today. Today, I want to show you how you can control your control issues. Now, I only have struggle with controlling myself, God, and other people. That's it, just those three things, right? But I've struggled doing what I know is best at times. Trying to get others to do what I want, or even telling God how to be God in my life and in the life of others. Seriously, though, even as I struggle with this, I have caught glimpses of what it's like not to be controlled by my control issues. And so I want to share some of those things that I hope will help you along the way. Even though I'm still sorting this out, still working this through, this confession series is really important because it's a call towards authenticity, that all of us would be renewed and really zealous about doing what's right in our life, not letting anything get in the way of what God wants to do next in our life. And rather than just share ideas about the Bible, here at Gateway, we like to talk about how the Bible can be transformative in your life and in our lives. So I want to share with you maybe an unusual way that God speaks to me at times. Sometimes a theme will come up over and over and over. And it'll be through the mouths of other people. For example, about a month ago, my wife told me, as she was reading through the scriptures, there was a prophet named Elisha that reminded her of me. Now that sounds like a compliment at first, until you know the story of Elisha. And certainly he did some amazing things, but he had a fault that almost derailed everything about him. And ironically, it kind of scared me when she said this, because this had happened 20 years ago. Someone, a friend of a friend, told me that I reminded them of Elisha. And I really didn't know much about Elisha. I knew he followed in the footsteps of Elijah, and he was at a time about 3,000 years ago leading the prophets of Israel. And remember, a prophet doesn't predict the future. A prophet communicates the truth as it is now. And he lived in a time when the people of Israel were up and down. They trusted God, then they rebelled against God. They trusted God, then they rebelled against God. And so there was one other story that stood out to me about Elisha. At that time, when I was told by this friend of a friend that you remind me of Elisha, I actually was a part of a group, and we were trying to organize something called the Spring Revival at Baylor University. I was up at Baylor. And this was really a week of spiritual renewal that we were trying to bring to our campus that really needed it. And we're trying to come up with a great theme, right? Get everybody excited on campus about coming out to these events. You usually come up with a theme and a theme verse because you needed something on the t-shirts, right? And we worked really hard. And this is in the early 90s, and we came up with something I thought was quite clever. Our theme was this: life is a compromise, not. Does that capture your attention? Some of you too old are like, that does not make sense. But some of you will remember this, right? Not was kind of the way. Now, maybe this will help you. The front of the t-shirt said life is a compromise, and the back said not. Is that better? Is that not so much? Okay. Well, one of the ideas somebody had, and they were just joking, is they said, why don't we have the theme be sick 'em bears? And we can have the theme verse be the story of Elisha. 2 Kings chapter 2. Maybe you don't know this story. It says these words: Then he, the prophet Elisha, went up from there to Bethel. And as he was going up by the way, young lads came out from the city and mocked him and said to him, "Go on up, you bald head. Go up, you bald head." When he looked behind him and saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 female bears came out of the woods and tore up 42 lads of their number. Now, everyone in the revival group, this committee, just thought this was hilarious. I didn't. I did not think this was funny. I started wondering, is this guy who thinks I'm like Elisha saying I'm a bald prophet with a short temper? And I didn't like the story of Elisha. He sounds like a vengeful jerk. I mean, they're just calling him a baldy. But then as I did a little bit more research years later, I discovered that they actually could have been threatening his life. You see, his mentor had just gone on up to heaven, and they had been saying, "We're going to help you go up, you bald head." And then actually the word used for tear up is the same word that means to separate. So it could mean the bears started running and they scattered. Or they could have been mauled. We're not exactly sure. But I didn't like this story of Elisha. It seems like a prophet to me should be more forgiving and not worry about what others are saying about him. I also didn't like this because at the time I still had hair, but it was retreating quite aggressively. Now there's only one thing worse than being bald at my age. It's going bald at 18. See, when I was in high school, the one bald kid in my class came up to me and said, "Hey, Eric, stop using your hair dryer." Anytime you get hair care advice from a bald kid, you're doomed. Like, there is not much hope for you. A few years later, I actually called one of those companies that guaranteed 85% of their clients, their hair grew back. I called them, they asked me a bunch of questions, and they refused to sell their product to me. I realized why they had such a high percentage of success, because they didn't sell it to people who were actually bald. About the same time hair stopped growing on my head, it started growing on my back. Yeah, sorry about that. Just confessions, right? But I have this plan, right? I could grow out my back hair and have a nice little comb over, right? So I know that at about 27 is when I shaved my head. I just finally gave up. I took control of the situation, right? And that was about the time when being bald was cool, right? I mean, it's still cool now, but you might think that being bald was cool because of Bruce Willis. Remember Bruce Willis? Yeah? Or maybe you thought it was first cool to be bald with someone like Michael Jordan. Or maybe baldness was cool began with Patrick Stewart, right? But actually, being bald was a cool thing, and it started with the prophet Elisha. Look at him, he's throwing up the peace sign even. I didn't like being referred to as this short-tempered, bald prophet. And so when my wife mentioned it a month ago, it brought back some weird memories. I didn't know what to do with that, but I'm in the middle of trying to work on these control issues. And so I went back into the scriptures and started reading it again. And it happened to be on June 26th that I was reading that morning about Elisha, and I have to admit, I wasn't getting a lot. I didn't see a lot that maybe God was trying to teach me in there, something to learn from his life. But then I went to lunch, and over lunch, the guy, after we spent some time together, said, "Thank you so much for your encouragement. Thanks for being like Elisha to me." I was like, "No, what did you just say?" It's like, "Well, thanks for being an encouragement to me." It's like, that's a weird reference. And I just kind of stored that away, and then I went to my next meeting, and I was at a doctoral cohort. I was teaching with Michael Ward, and it was on personal well-being and spiritual formation. And the next guy started talking about his project that he was going to work on. He was going to do some research on the prophet Elisha. Like, okay, this is too weird. And it just so happened that the day before, we kind of been working on some of this self-identifying process that you do in the Braveheart Intensive or the Destiny Project. If you've never been on those, I highly recommend those experiences. We really work through discovering our core values and our identity statement, even our shadow mission. And I had worked on mine the day before I reread the story of Elisha, and suddenly I started to feel encouraged, even affirmed that maybe the message that God had for me was I'm on the right track. You see, I wrote down my identity statement, and it said this: "With God's help, I am the invisible and powerful hurricane that brings together diverse people and sends out a unified force for good, for spiritual awakening." That's who I want to be. That's what I see I could be at my best, connected to God. And it just so happens that Elijah was taken up in a whirlwind, and a lot of Elisha's miracles were with water. That sounds like a hurricane, a whirlwind and water. Maybe this was just God's way of affirming that I'm headed in the right direction. I also discovered that Elisha's name means God is salvation. I thought that's who I want to be, someone that points people towards God as their rescuer. I also discovered that his dad's name, Shabbat, means one who judges. A few weeks ago, I'd asked my dad, who's from a long line of control freaks like myself, I said, "Dad, what's helping you not be so judgmental?" He said, "Well, I've decided I don't judge people anymore. I just evaluate them." That's better, right? Yet the story of Elisha was an affirmation in one way, but it was also a warning. As part of the work that we were doing and trying to understand who God created us to be, we also took an assessment called the Enneagram. It's based on the 7 deadly sins. It's like a weakness finder. And it revealed to me some of the dangers that if I don't take this control issue seriously, that I could face. That I could eliminate the ability for God to work in my life and through my life if I don't learn to trust him. The Jewish Encyclopedia warned when studying this person of Elisha, that anger deprives a prophet of his divine gift. God's Spirit only rests on those who are in a peaceful and joyful mood. Unfortunately, I'm not often in a peaceful and joyful mood. This was so convicting. And then in the Talmud, it actually says that Elisha's short temper would flare up at times and almost ended Elisha's ministry. As a result, he experienced God's discipline for trying to take control of situations where he should have allowed God to be in control. But in the midst of all this affirmation and warning, there was another story that really jumped out at me. And every time we read the scriptures, it's really important to put yourself in the story, to consider what can I learn from how this person reacted, what this person did. See, the scriptures aren't always prescriptive. Sometimes they're descriptive. In fact, there's a lot of stories of people doing really bad stuff we're not supposed to do. And then other times they're heroes. But we can learn also from those who are not the heroes. Listen to this story of Naaman in 2 Kings chapter 5. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman listened to his servant, his slave, and he actually went to his king, who sent him to the king of Israel. Now at that time, the king of Israel was an evil king and did not trust God, and he actually did not trust Naaman. He thought this was a trick. Elisha the prophet heard that Naaman was in town, and he sent these words to him. Verse 8. Elisha said, "Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him, "Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed." But Naaman went away angry and said, "I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call in the name of the Lord, his God, and wave his hand over the spot and cure me of leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed?" So he turned and went off in a rage. Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, 'Wash and be cleansed'?" So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel." The story goes on to tell us that Naaman tries to pay Elisha for his efforts, but Elisha refused. Maybe there have been moments in your life where you can see yourself like Elisha. People come to you for help, and you were able to help them emotionally, physically, or even spiritually. In this part of the story, we see Elisha at his best. Or maybe there have been moments when you've been more like the servants that you see in the story. Rather than being intimidated, they were willing to speak up and to send Naaman, the one who had abducted them from their homes. They were still kind enough to point him towards hope, towards God. Or maybe in this story, you see yourself a lot like Naaman. You see, Naaman was a proud man with control issues. He was incredibly powerful. He was used to people doing exactly what he told them to do. Even the king was willing to do whatever he asked. But there was one part of life he could not control, and that was his health. And we see the journey towards healing for Naaman required a path of humility. 5 different times we see Naaman has to humble himself and do something that he wouldn't normally want to do. First, he goes to his enemies, the Israelites. That would be something he would normally not do. Then when he goes to Elisha, he's expecting Elisha to come out and wave his hand over him and say some magic words, but Elisha remains in his home and tells him to go do something that also seems humiliating. Why would I go in that dirty river of the Israelites? If it's just a matter of taking a bath in the river, I could have done this in Damascus. But one of his servants wisely points out, If he'd asked you to do something crazy, you would have done it. This is easy. Just do it. Once again, he humbles himself and he listens, obeys his servant. And then when he tries to pay Elisha, almost as if he earned this healing, Elisha said no, wanting to give all the credit to God. What is it in your life that needs healing? And you've decided you know exactly how God could fix it. The question is, are you willing to trust him even if he doesn't? Are you willing to trust him even if he has a different path towards healing? You want someone to do something miraculous for you, and yet perhaps the healing is just on the other side of being faithful in the little things. Maybe your path towards healing will require a level of humility to experience what God has for you. Sometimes the healing is on the other side of something that we think is beneath us. When we look at the story of Naaman, we see someone who had control issues, and yet his path out was humility. In what ways is God asking to be faithful in little things in order to experience the miraculous, rather than looking for others to do something miraculous for you? Now, the shift from pride to humility requires a new perspective. And I had a great experience learning this just about a month or so ago. My wife and I, Deborah and I, have 2 middle school kids, Caleb and Trevi. It's fun having middle school kids. It's a little bit easier, right? You tell them to go to bed, and they usually do, right? They know how to brush their own teeth, right? There's just certain level of independence that's really fun. My favorite, though, is we can go out on dates now, and they babysit each other. We tell Trevi to babysit Caleb. She doesn't know this, but we also tell Caleb to babysit Trevi. And it always works out great, except for the one time it didn't. We were just down the street, and we get this frantic call. It was Trevi, but I couldn't even understand what she was saying. She was so upset. She just went on and on and on, but I couldn't understand her. I said, "Sweetheart, slow down. I don't know what's wrong. Tell me what's wrong." It was so alarming and so disturbing, I finally just said, "Sweetheart, we're on our way home." We jumped up and we drove home, and we got there, and they're both just so upset. And we started to gather the details. Basically, they got into a fight, and Caleb pushed her harder than he intended. And she fell backwards, and as she fell backwards, her phone slipped out of her back pocket and crashed on the floor, shattered into all these pieces. This was a tragic moment. It all made sense. And she was just so upset, and she was just going on and on and on about her phone was ruined, and she doesn't have a phone, and she needs this phone, and she didn't understand. I knew something she did not know. She was eligible for a free upgrade. This was a little fact I kept to myself for several months in case this very thing happened. But I couldn't get her to stop so I could tell her everything's going to be okay. She was just so worked up and so upset. And we finally got her to calm down. And I explained to her, because the conversation soon shifted to now she was upset that I wasn't upset that the phone was broken. And I finally was able to say, "I am disappointed in how you two treated each other, but I'm not worried about the phone because you have a free upgrade." And since she rides the bus to school, we went and got a new phone for her so she could have it the next day. Peace was restored in the world. Well, that night, as I was thinking about the day and even praying to God as I laid in bed, ready to go to sleep, I had this thought from God. Sometimes you are to me as your daughter was to you. I didn't like that thought. I don't consider myself anything like an 11-year-old girl. But it was in those moments that I realized that there are too many times when things seem desperate, and I just start telling God what to do, not pausing to hear his response, even knowing what is best in that moment. I settle for anxiety and a cracked iPhone, when all along, if I would just pause, God has a free upgrade ready for me right around the corner. You see, it's in the midst of brokenness that God can bring restoration and something even better. See, the God we believe in can actually take our worst moments, things that were meant for evil and actually bring good from those moments. I can tell you when things seemed so broken, even in my marriage, it was after those moments of brokenness that things have gotten better than they've ever been before it. See, sometimes we just give up and we get angry with God and we don't allow him to bring the healing he wants to bring. I wonder if there's things in your life that are keeping you from trusting God, that your perspective isn't where it needs to be. And I knew in that moment that God was right. I struggle at times to trust him. Maybe you've heard us talk about this discern assessment. It's a fantastic tool that helps you see better areas you need to work on. It's designed to be part of a life group. And when you take this, you have others in your life that are helping you become proficient at these spiritual outcomes. And when I took this assessment, my lowest score was trusting God. I didn't think that was true. I told everybody in my life group, something's wrong with the test here. This is not right. But in my more honest moments, there are times I think God's messed things up. If only he would have asked me. And as I finally acknowledged that I needed to grow in this arena, that's when I started to grow. You see, here's the funny thing about our spiritual journey. Maybe you found yourself stuck. And you can't help but start blaming other people. It's their fault you're not growing. When in reality, maybe there's a part of you that needs to grow and you're just unaware of it. See, I've grown so much when I finally acknowledged I need your help, God, and I need the help of other people. When we don't think we have anywhere to grow, we're stuck because what we need to get rid of is our pride. Middle schoolers are very interesting because they grow at different rates, if you haven't noticed this. Have you ever seen like the 4'9" boy with size 12 shoes? They're out there. There's more of them than you think. Or have you ever seen the little girl? She's got this cute little baby face, but these giant adult teeth. Have you ever seen the 5-foot-tall boy dancing with the 5'8" girl at the middle school dance? See, we all grow at different rates. And some of us have really grown and we're really mature in certain areas. We've really learned to hear God's voice, but we're actually quite immature when it comes to forgiving other people. Some of us have gotten really mature. We're fantastic at serving others, but we really, really need to grow in the area of generosity. See, some of us are not as spiritually mature as we think we are. We're spiritual adolescents, and sometimes spiritual adolescents, just like teenagers, we think we know everything. And the people that are over us are idiots. Sometimes the way out of spiritual adolescence is the same way out for our teenagers. And I had fantastic parents and spiritual mentors that have helped me over the years. You know what helps us move out of adolescence? Maybe you're here and you're raising teenagers, or maybe you're a ministry leader or a life group leader, network leader, and you have people in your ministry area that are spiritual adolescents. They think they're more mature than they really are. Here's how you can help them. Here's what's helping me and has helped me in the past. My parents and my spiritual mentors gave me as much freedom and responsibility as I could handle, but not as much as I wanted. And they were willing to have the hard conversations with me to explain why. They believed in me, and because of that, they didn't give up on me, but they also loved me with discipline. See, there are people that God has brought into your life knowing that he could entrust them to you, that you will love them enough to have a hard conversation with them. In fact, there are people that God has brought into your life that as they have a hard conversation with you, we need to have ears to hear so that we can move forward. No one likes hard conversations, but they're what move us forward when people see something in us that we cannot see in ourselves. We don't like hard conversations. We don't like discipline, but God loves us so much that he corrects when we need correcting. Proverbs 3 says it like this: "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves. As a father, the son he delights in." When you find yourself stuck or in the midst of a difficult time, just pause. Instead of telling God what to do, just pause long enough to ask God, what are you trying to teach me? How should I respond? I learned this from a couple who lost their little baby a year ago. They were so excited as they were pregnant for the first time, and only to find out at 6 months along that their baby would not survive. He had a genetic condition. For those next 3 months, we prayed that he would survive, that the doctors would be amazed. But the doctors, and even some family and friends, told him, you should end this pregnancy now. This is only going to get harder. But instead, they decided to keep the baby. And for the next 3 months, they sang to their little boy. They read to their little boy. They went on hikes with their little boy. And then when he was born, he never took a breath. He never grew up to speak a word. And as I spent some time with this couple, I was amazed. Because rather than anger towards God, they were certainly mourning, they were sad, they were devastated, but they had a sense of gratitude that could not be explained. They had a sense of peace I could not explain. They were grateful that they had these extra 3 months. They were grateful they knew his condition before so that they could enjoy these 3 months with him. At his celebration, his memorial, there was no way I could speak except for I drew from the strength they had, Paco and Jenny, the strength they had from God. And I remember seeing them with tears in their eyes and smiles on their faces, grateful for this little boy. I wonder if maybe you found yourself in the midst of tremendous loss. And it's because you lost someone that you've struggled to trust God ever again. Or maybe you've been hurt by other people. So hurt that you don't want to trust not only others, but you don't want to trust God again. We live in a broken and messed up world in which every one of us will die and every one of us will get hurt. Rather than blaming God and getting angry at God and not trusting God, we need to actually turn to him so he can heal us and help us become who he's created us to be. Rather than telling God what to do, we can actually allow him to heal us. You and I, we cannot see all that God sees. We don't know all that God knows. We don't know why Asher was not long for this world, but we can trust the one who does know. A pastor in New York City named Tim Keller says it this way: God answers prayers the way we would if we knew what he knows. God answers prayers the way we would if we knew what he knows. We can trust God no matter what you and I have faced. Too often we let the worst people in our lives affect us in a way where we don't even trust the best people in our lives. There's a verse that brings me great encouragement. I thought I would close with this. In Matthew 10, Jesus says these words: "Don't be afraid of those who want to kill your body. They cannot touch your soul. Save your fear for God, who holds your entire life, body and soul, in his hands. What is the price of 2 sparrows? 1 copper coin? But not a single sparrow can fall to the ground without your Father knowing it. And even the very hairs on your head are all numbered, even the hairs on your back. So don't be afraid. You are more valuable to God than a whole flock of sparrows. If you refuse to take up your cross and follow me, you are not worthy of being mine. If you cling to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for me, you will find it." I've caught glimpses of the freedom of not worrying about what others are doing, not trying to control other people, not trying to control God. I've experienced that freedom, and it brings so much joy and peace. I just want to make you feel that too. But I can't. In fact, God doesn't make us do anything. But he's right there. All we have to do is turn to him